Okay, let's cut right to the chase. After watching Deep Red, Dario Argento, probably one of the greatest horror directors ever, in my book. Let's finally review Deep Red. Deep Red stars David Hemmings, Daria Nicolodi, and is directed by Dario Argento. What is up, guys? It has been so long since I've reviewed a Giallo film, or Giallo film. I'm gonna call it Giallo for this, because some people call them Giallis, some people call them Giallo. And you know, my late friend Dylan, I constantly have to mention his name, because if not for him, I would never have seen any Giallo films. And these movies to me are the gift that keeps on giving. It's so cool when you've been like a horror fan for so long and never even like, really I never even heard of Giallo films. And then I met Dylan, and then he told me, you gotta see Tenebrae. Tenebrae was like his favorite movie. I had heard of Suspiria. I think that's the gateway to Giallo films. Everybody's heard of Suspiria, but I didn't know anything outside of that. And then I saw Tenebrae, and then I saw Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and then I saw Phenomena. And finally, I saw Deep Red. This is the Arrow release. This thing is just gorgeous. It includes, I believe, 2 cuts of the movie. It's got the director's cut, which is over 2 hours long, and it has what's called the export cut, or the European version, which is 1 hour and 45 minutes, which I think I prefer that version, actually. I've watched this movie a couple times now. This is really Argento's masterpiece as far as Giallo films go, in terms of like a slasher sense. And there's a lot of similarities in really most Giallo, like slasher types of films, and especially with this one and Bird with the Crystal Plumage. But this one is like the fully realized Dario Argento, like coming into his own, you know? Like he's a master filmmaker by this point. And this movie is a living testament of that. There are so many sequences in this movie that are just so ambitious. And, you know, a novice filmmaker would even just shudder at the thought of trying to film some of these scenes the way Dario Argento did. I still to this day, I've never seen scenes filmed in such an ambitious fashion. And this is just a little horror movie. But this movie is just a gift. It really is. And it's one that is highly rewatchable. Like, I watched it 2 times in a row, 2 days in a row. And it definitely would have been on my top 10 slashers list had I seen it before that point. And of course on my top 50 slashers list, which is doing great, by the way. I think it's at like 14,000 views right now. Thank you all for that so much. But first, quick plot synopsis. At the beginning of this movie, we have this, I guess she's kind of like a psychic, Helga. And she's doing really kind of this demonstration, and she senses the murder of this movie in the crowd, and she calls them out pretty much. And we don't see the murder, we see the murderer's point of view, which is a very common thing you see in Giallo films. And you know, the murderer gets up and leaves the establishment. But then after this is when all these murders start happening, and the first murder being Helga. And really, all the kill scenes in this movie are very ambitious, but this one, for some reason, gets the most recognition because you have the woman. I mean, really, it's this scene right here. You know, she's at her window, and Dario Argento had a thing for like doing deaths in windows. There's one in like Tenebrae, and of course, this famous one right here. But it's not just the punchline of that scene. These scenes are very violent. It's not just one knife stab and then it's over. Or I believe this was a cleaver. No, it's like the violence just keeps on happening, but also it's the way that Dario Argento moves the camera in these scenes, making them even more frightening, ratcheting up the tension. This scene in particular, I love at the demonstration, you see Helga when she like first gets her vision, you know, her feeling of the killer. And the camera like shoots up above her head and then back down on top of her. No! And it's just decisions like that that most directors wouldn't even dare think to try that, you know? Because it could come off as silly. But Argento just had a way of knowing exactly when to do stuff like that. And it just works. And it makes the scene more unpredictable too, because every time you're watching these scenes unfold, you never know what's gonna happen. And these scenes are stretched out pretty long actually, so you don't know how long these things are gonna go on for. But that's not the only thing too. It's like every time you watch one of Argento's films, especially Deep Red, it's like you notice different themes throughout, especially the way he handles his characters. The main character, Mark, is played by David Hemmings. He is the guy that sees the first murder of Helga. And so throughout the rest of the movie, he's trying to figure out who the killer is. And he always thinks he's in control, but he's not really in control. The killer is always 2 steps ahead of him. And he always assumes the wrong thing. Keep in mind, guys, this movie came out in 1975. Dario Argento loved to play with like gender norms, using strong women in the place of, you know, what you would usually find a strong man.
You, I bet you're the eyewitness, the man who saw the whole thing.
There's this other character, Gianna, who jumps on the case to help Marcus. And Marcus really underestimates her throughout the movie. There's even a silly scene where they arm wrestle, and she beats him at arm wrestling. And that's kind of one of the points of this movie, is that Marcus always underestimates everything that's going on around him. And especially a woman. He doesn't think a woman is as strong as she really is.
That was an absolute elbow off the table, and is a total and absolute cheat.
And I love that Dario Argento, he took risks like that even back in 1975. And this is a great example of how people act like strong women are a new thing in film and in horror films, especially horror films, definitely not. Gianna might be one of the strongest female characters in a horror film that I think I've ever seen. You know, she stands right up there with, you know, the best. Even literally, like the scene where they're sitting in the car and she's sitting above him. That's intentional. Also, Argento, he'd like to have gay characters in his movie. There is a gay character in this movie. It's supposed to be a man. It's actually played by a woman, which is kind of an interesting choice to make it even more ambiguous. But this is stuff that you would not get in a normal slasher film. A director that is this bold, you know, especially for in the 70s. But also, this is a Giallo film. This is an Italian film. One thing that's interesting about Giallo films too is that, like, half the dialogue in these movies is in one language and then half is in the other. You know, half of it's in English and then the other half is in Italian. So you always want to have your subtitles on, but that doesn't bother me at all anyway. Because I find these films more enjoyable than most American horror films at this point. Now, one other kill scene that I definitely wanted to mention was the bathtub kill. Only reason is because the scene is very similar to the hot tub kill in Halloween 2. I mean, it's very similar actually. It kind of reminded me of Bay of Blood with the similarities with Friday the 13th Part 2. And of course, these Giallo movies, they came out first. So you can see a lot of influence on American filmmakers looking back at these Giallo films. Hell, Deep Red came out in '75, 3 years before Halloween. I kid you not, there are quite a few scenes where I'm like, that feels like a Carpenter camera movement. You know, it just has a little bit of a Carpenter feel to it. So you could even say that Carpenter was probably influenced by Argento. But also, I think one reason a lot of these kills get under your skin, aside from the amazing direction, is that they're relatable. And what I mean by that is Argento would try to come up with ways that we all have dealt with in terms of the kills. Like, there's one kill where a guy, he falls on the corner of this post with his teeth. And, you know, everybody can relate to like chipping a tooth. Same thing with the glass. We've all had cuts from glass, you know, on our arms, on our fingers. So every time there's a kill like this, and you saw this stuff in like Suspiria too, I think it gets under your skin more because it's stuff that happens a lot actually to us in a much smaller degree, of course. Now, I'm not saying we've all taken a meat cleaver to the shoulder, you know, on a weekly basis. No, not at all. But Argento liked to play with those little intricacies of life. And to talk about that puppet in the movie, that just comes out of nowhere. by the time you get to that point in the movie, it doesn't even really faze you, because Deep Red has a lot of just weird things that are going on throughout, and that's another thing that's really common with Giallo films. A lot of times the plot structure's all over the place. Sometimes the plot doesn't even make sense. I think Deep Red does. But everything's kind of a heightened reality in these movies. So by the time you get to that freaking puppet that just like dances into the scene before the guy ends up biting that post corner, it's just stuff like that that makes the film stick out above the pack, really. Hell, Deep Red came out in 1975, and it's probably one of the most memorable horror movies I've ever seen. And the last thing I want to talk about, of course, is Goblin's score in this. It's not my favorite score, but it's still very effective. And one thing that was great about Goblin is that if you didn't have them, there are scenes in this movie where there's no dialogue. Like the scene where Marcus goes to the house, like in the second half of the movie. And there's no dialogue there. So the music of Goblin really guides you through the scene. And really, when you get right down to it, Goblin, it's pretty much like a progressive rock band. But they did make some interesting and creepy sounds aside from that normal rock backbeat. Hell, the Suspiria theme is one of the most recognizable themes in all of horror history. So guys, this movie, Deep Red, wow. Trapped on an Island for sure. Definitely buy the Arrow release if you haven't yet. It's a gift of a movie, it really is. And it just makes me want to explore more of Argento's movies, and I think this is like the 5th one that I've seen. The guy is just a master of horror. Also, be sure to come up with Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays we do Free for All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.